Okay, hello everyone. How are you? I hope you all have grabbed a coffee because it's this part of the day where you get sleepy. Thank you for choosing to join this session. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and talk about this exciting topic. This is my second session for today. So for those who don't know me, my name is Lilia Mesečkova, and I'm heading the engineering team of Sitefinity at Progress. I've been for about 15 years in the software industry, and in my early days, I used to work as a developer on .NET Framework 1.1. I know many of you will say, God, that was a long time ago, but I hope there are some people in the audience that remember those times also. So it was great for me to see how this technology evolved over time to make developers' life easier, but most importantly, help them deliver robust enterprise applications. And today, it is exciting to see the next generation of .NET Framework that is here to meet the requirements in front of the web applications in the cloud era. The requirements about CI/CD, integration with microservices, reliability, availability, all these things. So today, I'm going to talk about what are the big things in front of Sitefinity by end of 2020, and what is the next generation of Sitefinity project. I'm going to share with you what are the bits and pieces that we have delivered during the past year to enable us moving in that direction, and what are the plans ahead so that we can ensure that our partners and customers have the option to use the latest and greatest technologies when they develop widgets for Sitefinity. So the agenda for today is, first, I'm going to talk about what are the advantages for ASP.NET Core that we want to gain benefit. I'm going to talk about what a decoupled CMS is, what it means for Sitefinity, and what are the benefits that we want to gain. I'll share what are the next steps that we need to take to make sure that we are moving into the direction with .NET Core and Decoupled CMS. I'll talk about our vision for integration with microservices, with no code, only configuration. And finally, I will tell you what it means for Sitefinity to completely migrate to .NET Core. So let's get started. ASP.NET Core is an open source cross-platform framework developed by Microsoft and community, and it basically aligns the MVC and Web API technology. It brings functionality that enables developers to deliver super fast APIs, and it comes with a set of tools that simplifies the development process a lot. So this is on a high level, what are the advantages of .NET Core that we want to bring in Sitefinity. So I will talk about how we can make this happen. The answer is we'll decouple the CMS and we will deliver the next generation of the head on .NET Core. So before getting into more details, I'll make a short overview of the existing capabilities of Sitefinity when it comes to page design. Sitefinity is a traditional CMS with powerful headless capabilities. When used as a traditional CMS, it brings a what you see is what you get content editor, together with layout templates and resource packages that basically enable website creators to deliver website with server-side technologies. When used as a headless CMS, the powerful APIs of Sitefinity enable developers to build rich client-side applications with the technologies that they need and that they like, whether that's Angular or React or Vue, it's up to them. But I would like to spend a little more time to talk about those APIs. Those are APIs that not only enable CRUD operations, but they support lifecycle and workflow for items, and this is very powerful. Imagine that you are building a website with Headless Sitefinity, and the real challenge is how do you preview the code changes that you plan to deploy, but also the draft content that the content editors are building in parallel. That's a challenge to be solved. And because Sitefinity has those powerful APIs, they can have developers and marketing can have a staging environment where the code changes are deployed, and this code is communicating with the REST API, taking the draft content. That way, they can ensure the quality of the new go-to-market feature and collaborate on the staging environment. So this is a great advantage that Sitefinity delivers. But traditional CMS has some challenges, and Headless also. So we want to bring best of both worlds and really have the what you get is what you see editor together with templating and layout. That's the most powerful thing for the content editors and marketers. But we want to have at the same time those powerful REST APIs that will enable integrations with other systems. So we can achieve that decoupling the head and moving it to a new technology. That way we can enable our partners and customers use those new technology. And that head to communicate with those powerful REST APIs. So let's take a look at the current hosting architecture of Sitefinity. It is based on 2 tiers. The first one is hosting the database services, and the second one is hosting the Sitefinity application, or Sitefinity services, if you wish. I have outlined the 2 most important bits and pieces in this application. The first one are the backend services that are there to serve the content editing requests. And the other component is the MVC page rendering engine that is there to serve the request to the front-end users. This is on a very high level, very simplified, the existing hosting architecture of Sitefinity. So we envision to move towards 3 tiers architecture. Again, the first layer will remain for the database services, but then we will have 2 separate applications being hosted on 2 different environments. You can host them in the same environment if you wish, but you can host them separately. So the first application will serve the backend request. It's going to be a backend service, and then the second tier will host the front-end service. And those 2 tiers will communicate via REST. So what are the benefits that we aim to gain with that setup? First thing is to have a better developer productivity. If you are making customizations on the front-end part, you don't want to deal with the back-end piece. You want to customize just the front-end. So that will move the process much faster because these 2 pieces will be separated. On the other hand, it will enable easier upgrades because all the customizations will be isolated. So the back-end services, you will upgrade them just like that. You'll have no challenge. And also, separating the back-end and the front-end will increase the level of security and reliability of the system. As I already mentioned, the front-end application will be based on .NET Core, and that will enable IT administrators to host this application on any platform that is supported by .NET Core, whether that's Windows, Linux, or Docker containers, whatever you can think of. But it will also enable organizations to scale for cheaper, because the front-end application will be much smaller, lightweight, and it will require less resources to run. So when you scale, you can use less powerful machines. And finally, when we build the API to be consumed from the .NET Core application, we will open the door for our partners and customers to build their own renderers. Again, whether that's Angular or React or Vue or whatever the next generation is, you have the APIs that are needed for the page layout, for the widgets hierarchy. You have everything there. So let's take a look at a comparison between the 2 tiers architecture and 3 tiers architecture when it comes to the startup process. Imagine that you need to make a change on a widget, probably add some label or new field, something like that. And you need to see what the outcome of this change is, or probably deploy it. So in the first scenario, when you do that, because the backend and the front end are running in the same process, you will restart the whole system. And then you have to wait for the whole system to initialize again. In the 3 tiers scenario, when you deploy or you just run the application to see the outcome, the only process that you will restart is the front-end application process. In the back-end, services will remain up and running. So that's a huge optimization. And together with the improvement in ASP.NET Core compilations, we really think that the improvement will be huge for Sitefinity project. So let's now take a look at a comparison when it comes to scaling. Again, in the 2 scenarios, 2 tiers architecture and then 3 tiers architecture. So if you are experiencing a heavy user load and you have to scale, you need just to duplicate the application on the next nodes that you want to add. And in this first scenario, you are scaling the front end and the back end because they live in the same application. But when it comes to the 3 tiers architecture, now you have different applications hosted on separate environments, and you can scale just this small piece there, only the front end, and you require less powerful resources to do so. Of course, if you hit some bottleneck on the back-end services level, you can still scale there if you need, but you have the flexibility to choose which one to scale and when. And talking about hosting, in the first scenario, because Sitefinity is .NET standard, you are bound to Windows Server for hosting. For the 3 tiers architecture, for V1, the backend services will remain bound to Windows because they will remain on .NET standard for a while. But the new front-end application, you will be able to host on Linux or Docker containers or whatever. We have a vision to also migrate the backend services to .NET Core, but that's going to be a phase 2. And I'll talk about that at the end of the session. So on a high level, that was why we want to move to decoupled CMS and what are the benefits that we want to gain: performance, scalability, reliability, new technologies for development. Now I wanted to show you what are the steps that we plan to take. On a very high level, we're going to deliver a new framework for widgets development. We're going to deliver a .NET Core rendering engine. We're going to deliver an API that this rendering engine needs to render the pages. And we will also deliver an editor that is powered by this .NET Core rendering engine. So I'm going to take the reverse engineering approach here. And first, I would like to show you where we want to land. So first thing is, when we introduce the .NET Core renderer, I'll show you a diagram to see how this will fit. So here, you see the same 3 tiers that we spoke about. First one, database. Second one is backend services. And the third one is front-end services. So you have the page editing UI living in the backend, and you also have the Pages REST API living there. On the other hand, in the 3rd tier, we will have the framework for .NET Core widgets development. together with the rendering engine that is needed to render those widgets and the layout that aligns those widgets. So when a page editor comes and opens the home page to make some changes, the page gets rendered at the moment with ASP.NET Web Forms engine. This is the current rendering engine for Sitefinity. So this is what happens. This engine is rendering the page. Then the toolbox populates definitions of those widgets that have been developed in .NET Core. So they will appear in the toolbox, and then the designer will be able to drag and drop them and design a page. And when done, the page will be persisted to the database via the pages layout service. And whenever that user over there, the front-end user, requests that page, the request will go to the .NET Core rendering engine. That rendering engine will take the meta model of the page from the REST API. And based on this meta model, we'll render the page to the end user. So this is on a high level how the new rendering engine together with the .NET Core framework will operate. But one important thing to mention here is for V1, if you notice, the rendering engine that is for the editor is different from the rendering engine that is for the front-end user. And we want to improve that. So the next phase would be to have a page editor UI that is powered by the .NET Core rendering engine. So that's the same picture here with one main difference. When the editor comes and opens the page to edit it, this time the page will be rendered by this .NET Core page rendering that is also there to serve the request to the front-end user. So the same process will go. Again, the toolbox will populate the widgets that have been developed in the third layer. The designer will be able to design the page as he or she needs, and will persist it to the database via the pages layout REST API. And again, when the front-end user makes a request, the renderer will take the meta model from the pages layout service and will use that model to render the page to the end user. This is on a high level, and I know it's a pretty complex diagram to grasp it on as the first time you see it, but I hope it makes some sense. And I'm going to demonstrate this in a video in a moment. So, what are the key components that you need to remember here? We're going to have a .NET Core rendering widget framework. We're going to have a renderer, and we're going to have a page layout REST API. So that's one of the components that we'll deliver. It will return in a JSON format the description of the page. Basically, the hierarchy of widgets, the details of the widgets, their placeholders, everything that a rendering engine would need to render the layout. And this would be in a technology agnostic way, so that each rendering engine can interpret the information in a way they need. So now I'm going to show you a video of our POC. Last year we had Innovation Days at Progress, and our team delivered that POC, and we actually won the first prize with that. So I'm really excited to show it now. What you will see is how a page designed with existing Sitefinity is rendered with .NET Core project and with Angular project. We did the Angular renderer just to make sure that we expose the right APIs and to make sure that it is possible other renderers to be delivered. So let's take a look at it. You see a hosted instance in Azure. This is the Progress Next website from last year. And let's navigate back to the administration to see the layout of the page. You can see the content blocks there and the layout controls that are splitting the page into rows and columns. And you can see this page layout REST API that I talked about. It returns the widgets hierarchy in a JSON format. It contains everything that is needed for the renderer to operate. So this is a macOS .NET Core project that contains all the functionality to render the page designed in Sitefinity. So let's run it and see what the outcome is. You see the page looks absolutely the same as the original page rendered by the current Sitefinity. And it's amazing. We use two different technologies and we have the same outcome. And now this is an Angular project which has the components that are representing the widgets. And now we can run the project and see what the outcome is with the Angular renderer. You see that we have pixel perfect match here, which is amazing. And we're going to make a quick test. We'll switch those two content blocks just to see how that's going to be reflected in the .NET Core application and in the Angular application. You'll see now that when we refresh, we have those two content blocks switched. That's the .NET Core application, and the second one is the Angular one. So that was really exciting to see that it's possible at all. And now I wanted to show you what is the performance improvement that we were able to measure with the .NET Core application. So in the next video, you will see two side-by-side projects. One is the current Sitefinity instance, and the next one is the .NET Core instance. And they're displaying custom news widget. So the test that we're going to make is to apply changes to those two custom widgets and see what it would take for both of them to bring an outcome. So let's get started. So that's the current Sitefinity instance, and then this is the .NET Core project on the other side. So again, here is the current .NET Standard Sitefinity. We changed that this event now displays events. And the other one is the .NET Core. Again, the change for events was done there. And we started to measure the time since we kicked out the compilation. And you will see that for the .NET Core application, it needed, let's see, 18 seconds to load. And for Sitefinity, existing Sitefinity was 40 seconds. And it was really exciting to see that change. And this is just for a page with one widget. Imagine on a larger scale what that it means. So really, our team was so excited to do that we wanted immediately to start working on the project and deliver on it. But it's kicked out, and we have the plans to deliver this on iterations. So finally, I wanted to talk about widgets development, how that will change. First important thing to outline is that the new widget will communicate with the REST API of Sitefinity rather than with the native API as it is now. So we will have to deliver a C# SDK for those REST APIs, so that this can be used in the widgets. And another important piece that will be needed for custom widget development is the ability to specify custom endpoints into the REST APIs. Currently, if you want to manipulate additionally the data coming from the REST API, you need to do that on the servers, on the client side, which is not the most effective thing. So we want to enable our developers to specify a custom endpoint and manipulate the data on the server side before they return it on this endpoint. And then I want to talk about out-of-the-box widget designers, and that's one of my favorite ones. Today, if you need to develop user-friendly widget designers for your widgets, you need to do that yourself. And with this capability that we plan to deliver, all the custom widgets will receive designers out of the box. And that will happen dynamically based on the fields that are implemented in the widgets and based on their type. They will receive automatically selectors mapped to those fields. And that's really cool. And that will be applicable for existing projects which upgrade to the version where we deliver that. Those new designers will be based on Angular 2. But in general, you will not need to develop any designers anymore. That will be the case. So this is on a high level what we have as a plan to move towards decoupled CMS with .NET Core. And now I wanted to talk about how we can apply exactly the same principle of decoupling the customizations when we talk about backend. Why not? So I'm going to tell you what is our vision in terms of enabling customizations on the backend via microservices, and you can do that only with configuration. So on this slide, you can see Sitefinity instance there and some microservices here. We envision to have a new module called service hooks, which will basically enable to configure a hook to be called whenever a specific event occurs in the system. And you just make that via configuration. So imagine you have the following scenario. You have a website that requires some user registration, for example, Progress Next. And you want to customize Sitefinity additionally to print a badge when someone registers at the event. So at the moment, you can do that within Sitefinity. But we envision that you can probably implement this as a microservice and have an endpoint and just configure this endpoint in the system. So let's see the workflow. If a customer comes and registers to the event, the Sitefinity framework will tell the module that the form has been submitted, that this event has occurred. And this module will call the endpoint that has been configured for this type of event. So the microservice will execute the operation that you have implemented, and when completed, he can call back to the system to update the system that the operation is completed successfully. So what that will give us? Faster time to market. First thing, because you can implement what you need in the technology that you want and host it wherever you want it, out there as a microservice, and you will not have to deploy Sitefinity. It's going to be up and running, and you just need to configure it. You will also be able to use the best technologies to solve the problem that you have, and you will be able to scale only the components that are causing bottleneck in your system. So here's the UI that we plan to have for configuring such kind of hooks. This is the list of hooks. You see, you can have like a comment submitted for news, you can have like blog post is published event, and then you can have different types of hooks for those events. So if you want to create another hook, you just specify what the type is, you tell what the event is, and you say, well, call that endpoint. And that's it. That UI looks pretty much the same as the new rule-based forms introduced in 12.0. If you haven't checked those out, it's very intuitive and very easy to use, so I encourage you to go and see it. And with that, this is our vision for how we can decouple the customizations in the backend. So we talk how we can decouple the front-end part for customization and move it to a newer technology. How we can do that for the backend customizations, again, use newer technologies with microservices. So now the question is, when we will migrate the backend services and what it means for Sitefinity to do so. So this is our long-term vision, definitely phase 2. And these are the major steps that we need to take in that direction. The first one and bigger one, I would say, is the ORM of the system. We need to replace it with an ORM that can work on .NET Core. So we have done some initial research which show that Entity Framework Core is having all the functionality that is needed for Sitefinity to move. Another piece that we need to solve is WCF services, but I would say this is not a problem. That's just something that we need to do because a major portion of the WCF services have already been replaced with the new ODate services, which are based on Web API. So building the new UI of Sitefinity, which is based on those REST API, on this REST API, that made us be able to move faster in that direction. So when we started the new UI, that was not only about bringing the next generation of user experience, but it was about changing the architecture, making it more reliable, more performant, allowing us to move to newer technologies. So it was part of a major plan. It was not just a UI change. And the last piece is the workflow engine. Microsoft stated officially that they're not going to migrate the workflow foundation framework to .NET Core. So this is something that we need to consider, but again, not a big issue for us. And with that, we are approaching towards the end of our session. I wanted to make a quick recap of the things that we have covered. First thing that we talked about was what are the advantages of ASP.NET Core that we want to benefit from. First thing is performance boost. Second thing is cross-platform. Third piece is the development tools that are coming with this framework so that we can give that to our developers and customers and partners. Second thing that we covered was the decoupled CMS architecture and what it would bring. It will bring better scalability, better performance, security, and reliability. The third thing that we spoke about was the steps that we plan to take to move there. Remember, that was .NET Core widgets framework for .NET Core based framework for widgets development, .NET Core renderer, .NET Core editor, and page layout REST API. And finally, actually not finally, the fourth thing was our vision for how we can enable backend customizations to be implemented as microservices and then configured in Sitefinity. And finally, we spoke about what it means for Sitefinity to completely migrate to .NET Core and what are the major steps that we need to take in that direction. Again, ORM is the biggest piece, WCF services and workflow are the smaller pieces. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, now is the time.
So time frame wise, 2020 maybe?
2020? Yeah, you all will see bits and pieces coming out in every release. Okay, I'm not gonna say what is the confidence for the one that I'm saying now, but basically the page layout service together with the new designers, we really aim to deliver that in the coming release, next or the one after if something happens. So basically you will see the page layout coming out, the widgets designers and .NET Core. These are the different pieces and I have stated them as different steps just because we really aim to deliver them one by one and you will see what is the progress. It's not like a one big bang release. We really want to be lean and to have a quick feedback loop, deliver those steps. So when we say by end of 2020, this is our vision to be there so that this can be used in production, but bits and pieces you'll see coming out in the coming releases. Yes?
Great information, thank you. Now we're talking about decoupling.
Yep.
Any thoughts about decoupling the database itself? Other competitors for CMS, for instance, they would have 2 or 3 different databases, one used internally by the back end of Sitefinity and one for the users. During upgrades and updates, we don't have to actually have one database that the whole thing has to be upgraded. So is there any way to do decoupling of the database in the future?
So that's a very interesting question, and let me repeat it. Is there any plan to decouple the database, the current database, into smaller pieces, which are dedicated for the back end and for the front end? Actually, this is something that we have identified as a thing to solve. I had a session earlier today about multi-regional deployment, and we delivered one of those pieces there because to enable that scenario, we had to enable Sitefinity to work with read-only databases, and for some user statistics that it collects, we had to separate the database. So we've done some separation to support that scenario, but we'll definitely go further. Let's talk about the specific scenarios that we need to cover, and definitely we'll consider that. We are all fans of decoupled things, going microservices, so anything that can facilitate that and make different components easier to manage, yeah, that's something to be considered. Yes?
Do you have any strategy suggestions on how you might organize your code if you're having to have a Sitefinity solution for the back end and then a separate Sitefinity solution for the front end?
The question was, do we have a strategy to for best practices on how to organize the code for the back-end application and for the front-end application? At the moment, no, but definitely I would expect this to come with the .NET Core framework for widgets development. Yeah, definitely. I would expect that the best practices for the back-end will remain the same. So we'll come with new practices for the new front-end rendering engine. Yes?
You said there will be a C# SDK for accessing that REST API.
Yes.
Are you planning to release a JavaScript SDK for accessing it?
The question was, do we plan to release C# SDK for those REST APIs? The answer is we already have C# SDK for these REST APIs.
I mean, like, so you demoed using Angular to display a page.
Yeah.
Are you going to have like a JavaScript SDK for doing that? Or is that just...
For the page layout service, you mean? Yeah. Definitely it's going to be part of this SDK. Once we have the service, we'll deliver the SDK with it. Yeah, because as I said, we want to have, we want to enable partners to and customers to develop their own rendering engines, and if they need C# SDK, yeah, that's the case. You had a question?
Big question.
Okay.
Did the effort start for moving from open access to NET framework? That will tell me how much longer we have to wait. Did you already start, or is it something?
The question was, did we already start to do something in a direction to moving to entity framework? And the answer is our current focus is front-end for the moment. So once we get some more traction there, that's the second piece we're going to focus on. We have 5 more minutes, but okay.
So upgrading, how will that look going from 10 or version 11? I know that you're going to do it in stages, but I assume that once we hit .NET Core, it's going to be a breaking change. So.
Okay, that's a great question. The question was, what is the migration path when we have this .NET Core framework implemented? Definitely for V1, that's going to be the solution for new projects. Over time, we'll consider a migration path. Yeah, it's not going to be upgrade straightforward. I would assume that some widgets that you have on your existing site will have to be rewritten on .NET Core, but my expectations there are that this is going to be a pretty simple task to do because there are not so many changes that it's not like web forms and MVC. It's like MVC to MVC.NET Core should be much easier and much simpler. And yeah, that's basically what should be changed, the widgets. The existing pages, we will expose them with this API. It will expose old pages. So basically, if you have the new widgets, you're done. With the ORM, that's going to be trickier. Okay?
I don't know if you asked about business, but what are the licensing ramifications, say, pull some data, you use it off some domain, or...
I'm sorry, can you please read it?
Licensing ramifications?
Okay.
Like, say, if I local data in the central wherever and use it on the subdomain? Is there, do I need to still enable?
Okay, that's interesting question, and it is with this new architecture and approach, if I use a subdomain, should I still pay more as it is now, or this is going to change? Is that correct? Or is this what?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think now if we want to, if our business wants to use another instance, we have to pay.
Yeah. We haven't discussed that topic. I haven't considered that something needs to change in that direction, but maybe we have missed something. So let's discuss this and see how it is. Okay. Yes.
So in the distant future, when we've replaced the Sitefinity backend with .NET Core, as that other gentleman mentioned, there will be a breaking change that will incur some development costs. Are you planning on still releasing security updates for whatever version precedes that .NET Core?
Absolutely. I mean, we will give time for people to move. We realize it's going to be a pain for our customers and partners, so we'll give time. We'll produce and maintain this for a while, but we'll keep you posted on that, and definitely we'll work to make it smooth. Yeah.
Any decision which product or how you're going to move away from Windows workflow?
We haven't done too much research on that, and the reason is the way Sitefinity currently uses Workflow Foundation, it does not rely heavily on the functionality of that engine, so we think we can replace it pretty easily. So we don't consider this a challenge. Okay, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.